I never liked libraries much. Something about them always made me feel uneasy, not in an obvious way, but in a slow, creeping way, like someone watching from just beyond my line of sight. Maybe it was the unnatural silence, the way every little sound felt amplified in the vast, echoing space. But that night, I didn't have a choice. I had a major research paper due, and my apartment was far too distracting. The flickering glow of my phone screen, my roommate's unpredictable music habits, and the nagging temptation to lie down for just 5 minutes, all conspired against me. The university library was too crowded, so I decided to go somewhere quieter. A public library I'd visited a couple of times before. It wasn't a big place, but it had 2 floors, plenty of seating, and more importantly, it stayed open late. It was a 20-minute drive from my place, which wasn't ideal, but I needed somewhere to focus. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the sky had already deepened into a velvety dusk. The lot wasn't completely empty, but it was close. Just a handful of scattered cars under the dim orange glow of the overhead lamps. I turned off the ignition and sat there for a moment, staring at the quiet building. A few windows were lit, casting rectangles of warm light onto the pavement. With a sigh, I grabbed my bag, locked the doors, and headed inside. The library smelled the way all libraries do, a mix of old books, dust, and something faintly reminiscent of coffee. The air was cool, and the silence felt thick. There was only one librarian at the front desk, an older woman with glasses perched at the end of her nose. She glanced up briefly as I walked in, but didn't say anything. I made my way to the second floor, climbing the creaky wooden stairs. Up here, it was even quieter. The open layout of the main floor was replaced by rows of towering bookshelves, creating narrow pathways that felt strangely isolated. Most of the tables were empty. There was one woman sitting a few tables away, absorbed in a book, but other than that, the place was nearly deserted. Perfect. I picked a table tucked between 2 bookshelves, slightly hidden from the main walkway. It felt secluded, almost like my own little corner of the world. I set my bag down, pulled out my laptop and notebooks, and got to work. Once I got into my research, time slipped away. The world outside my screen faded, and all that existed was the quiet rustling of papers, the soft hum of my laptop, and the steady click of my keyboard. I didn't look up. I barely moved. I was in the zone. Every now and then, I'd stretch my neck or rub my eyes, but I never glanced around the room. I was too deep into my work, too lost in my own little world. And that was my mistake. At some point, maybe 3 hours in, I finally leaned back and stretched my shoulders. They ached from being hunched over for so long. That's when I noticed it. A small cream-colored envelope. It was sitting at the edge of my table, neatly placed. I stared at it, my brain sluggish from hours of focus. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of that. A slow, uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I reached for it hesitantly, fingers brushing against the smooth paper. It wasn't sealed. I glanced around the room. The woman from earlier was still at her table, flipping a page in her book. Other than that, the floor was empty. Swallowing, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph of me. I felt my heartbeat thud against my ribs. The photo had been taken earlier that evening. It showed the back of my head, my hunched posture, my laptop screen glowing faintly in front of me. The angle was disturbing. Someone had taken this photo from behind a bookshelf, watching me through the narrow gaps. A shiver crawled up my spine. I turned the photo over, half expecting a message scrawled on the back, but there was nothing. Just a blank, smooth surface. I looked over my shoulder, eyes darting between the bookshelves. Nothing. No one. The uneasy feeling deepened, turning into something colder. Someone had been watching me, and I hadn't noticed. I stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. I walked over to the woman sitting a few tables away. "Hey, sorry to bother you," I said, keeping my voice low. "Did you see anyone come by my table?" She blinked, adjusting her glasses. "No, I don't think so. I mean, I've been pretty into my book, but I don't think I saw anyone near your table." I hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Nobody at all." She frowned slightly. "I mean, I've been pretty into my book, but I don't think I saw anyone near your table." I forced a smile. "All right, thanks anyway." As I turned away, she spoke again. "Why? Did something happen?" I hesitated. How was I supposed to explain this? "It's nothing," I said finally. "I just thought I heard someone." I returned to my table, packed my things quickly, and headed for the exit. The envelope with the photograph was clutched tightly in my hand. I wasn't going to leave it behind. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of there. Stepping outside into the cool night air, I exhaled sharply. The parking lot was even emptier than before. I started walking toward my car, my footsteps echoing faintly in the night. The lot was quiet, still, almost unnaturally so. That's when I saw it. A truck. It was parked at the far end of the lot, backed into a space, facing the building. The headlights were off, but the driver's side window was down, and someone was inside. A man. I couldn't make out his face. The shadows concealed most of his features, but I could see the camera he was holding, lifting it to his face, and the moment I looked in his direction, he took another picture. My breath hitched. I froze for a split second, then took a step forward, trying to get a better look. But the man didn't hesitate. He lowered the camera, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and started the truck. The engine rumbled to life, and before I could react, he pulled out of the parking space and drove off. I stood there, gripping my bag, heart pounding. I never saw his face. I didn't recognize his truck. I had no idea who he was or why he was taking pictures of me. Unanswered questions. I drove home, paranoia settling deep in my bones. I checked my mirrors the entire way, watching for any sign that I was being followed. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door behind me and pulled the blinds shut. For a long time, I just stood there, gripping the envelope, staring at the photo. Someone had watched me for hours without me realizing. Someone had left me a photo of myself on purpose. Someone had followed me outside and taken another picture. I never went back to that library again. And to this day, I have no idea who he was, or if he ever stopped watching. I never believed in ghosts. That's the first thing you need to understand about me. I wasn't one of those people who looked for signs of the supernatural or jumped at every creak in the floorboards. But what happened to me at the library that night, what I saw, what I felt, shook something deep inside me that I still can't explain. I had been working at the Blackwood Public Library for nearly a year. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was quiet, predictable. I liked that. The building itself was old, with high wooden shelves that smelled of dust and ink, and a dim lighting system that made everything feel just a little too shadowed. But it was peaceful, and it was only a 10-minute bus ride from my apartment, which made it perfect. The library was never really busy except during exam season, when students crammed into the reading areas, desperate to scrape together last-minute notes. Otherwise, it was just a handful of regulars. Elderly men reading newspapers, a few local writers scribbling in their notebooks, and the occasional weirdos who spent hours flipping through books without checking anything out. I mostly worked evening shifts, which meant I had the responsibility of closing up at night. I'd done it dozens of times before without any issues. Lock the front doors, turn off the lights, do a quick walkthrough to make sure no one was hiding inside. Easy. until that night. It was a Thursday just before closing when I first noticed something odd. I was doing my usual walkthrough when I found a stack of books in aisle 14. At first, I assumed someone had just been lazy and left them there. It happened all the time. I sighed, kneeling down to pick them up. As I placed the books back on the shelves, I hesitated. Something about them felt off. They were all old, much older than the rest of the collection. Thick, leather-bound covers, worn edges, and pages that smelled ancient. One book stood out in particular. It was heavier than the others, with a dark green cover and no title. There was something unsettling about the way it felt in my hands. Cold, almost damp. I ran my fingers over the faded gold lettering on the spine, but it was written in a language I didn't recognize. I shrugged it off and placed it back on the shelf. Maybe a donation. Maybe a mistake. Either way, I wasn't paid enough to care. I finished my walkthrough, turned off the lights, and locked up for the night. I didn't think about the books again. The next evening, I was back at work. Same shift, same routine. Around 8:45 p.m., just as we were about to close, I heard something fall in the distance. A soft thud, like books hitting the floor. I sighed, already knowing where I'd find them. Aisle 14. Sure enough, the same stack of books was lying in the exact same spot as before. I stared at them, my stomach twisting. I was sure I had put them back. There was no way I'd forgotten. And even if I had, why were they stacked so neatly, as if someone had deliberately placed them there? A chill ran down my spine, but I forced myself to stay rational. Maybe one of my coworkers had moved them. Maybe a customer. But the library was nearly empty, and something told me, deep down, I wouldn't find anyone responsible. I picked up the books again, this time paying closer attention. And then I saw it. The same green book. It was back at the bottom of the pile, like it had never been placed back on the shelf. I swallowed hard. That wasn't possible. Feeling an odd mix of curiosity and dread, I flipped it open. The pages were thick and rough, covered in handwritten symbols that I couldn't read. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't French. It wasn't in any language I had ever seen before. And then I reached a page that made my hands go ice cold. It was the only page with an illustration, a full-page drawing done in black ink. It showed a man standing in a dimly lit aisle, surrounded by towering bookshelves. His face was turned away, but something about him seemed off. His limbs were too long, his posture too stiff. And then I noticed the small details. The shape of the shelves, the pattern on the carpet, the number at the top of the page. My breath hitched. This was my aisle. I slammed the book shut and dropped it, backing away so fast I nearly tripped. My chest was tight, my breathing uneven. That was when I heard it. A sound that froze me in place. Soft footsteps, not from the main area, but from inside aisle 14. I spun around, heart hammering. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt it. Someone was standing just beyond the shelves, out of sight. I forced myself to move, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at me to run. My legs felt heavy, my pulse pounding in my ears. I turned the corner, and the aisle was empty. The only thing there was the green book, lying open on the floor. I left it. I turned and walked straight out of the library, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. I didn't look back. I refused to look back. I called in sick the next day, but the day after that, I forced myself to go back. Part of me needed to know. The library was quiet. Everything looked normal, until I went to aisle 14. There were no books on the floor, no strange noises, nothing. I almost laughed at myself. Maybe I'd imagined it all. Maybe I was just overtired. And then I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The green book was gone. Not on the floor. Not on the shelves. I searched everywhere. It had vanished. I tried asking my coworkers if they had seen it, but no one remembered ever cataloging such a book. There was no record of it in our system. I quit my job 2 weeks later. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I swear I can still hear the sound of books falling to the floor. And sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of something tall and thin standing in my hallway. Its limbs too long. Its posture too stiff. When I turn to look, it's gone. But I know it's there, watching, waiting. And I know one day I'll turn the corner and find that green book again, lying open on my floor. I was 5, maybe 6, when it happened. That puts it in the category of early childhood memories where most recollections blur at the edges, softened by time. But not this one. This memory is sharp, unshakable. We had just moved to a new town, and everything still felt unfamiliar. The streets, the stores, even the way the air smelled. My mom was trying to keep things normal for us, taking my little brother and me to places where we could feel at home. One of those places was the Pine Valley Public Library. It was a few blocks from our house, a small red brick building with ivy crawling up the sides. Inside, it smelled like old books and carpet cleaner. My mom loved it there. She'd take my little brother, still a toddler, into the adult section, while I was allowed to stay in the children's area and play on the computers. That day had started at the mall. I remember this because Mom always got us ice cream cones from the Dairy Queen inside. I still had half of my cone left when we arrived at the library. The cold, sticky feeling of the melting vanilla still in my hand when I walked through the doors. Everything about that day felt ordinary, until it didn't. The children's section was in the back corner of the library, past rows of tall wooden shelves filled with books that smelled like dust and paper. There were a few computers set up against the far wall, chunky and old, running whatever kids' games were popular at the time. I played for a while, but I got bored. I wanted to find a nice spy book. Those were my favorite. I knew they were somewhere in the kids' section, so I started wandering through the aisles, my small fingers dragging along the spines of books as I walked. That's when I heard it. A soft sound from behind me. I stopped and turned. Nothing. I was facing the back wall of the library where another tall shelf leaned against the brick. Just books. Then, a face appeared. Half a face, peeking around the edge of the bookshelf. A grown man. "Peekaboo," he said. I laughed. It felt like a game. He disappeared behind the shelf, then peeked out again. "Peekaboo." I laughed again. No fear. No hesitation. He smiled. Then he stepped out from behind the shelf. He was tall, wearing a navy jacket and a beanie pulled low over his head. His face was thin, his beard was patchy, his eyes were strange. Too wide, too focused. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "I spy books," I told him. "I think I know where they are. Come on." And just like that, I followed him. The man led me to a lower bookshelf near the back wall of the library. And sure enough, there they were. Rows of I Spy books. I pulled out my favorite one. I Spy Treasure Hunt. "Let's go sit and play," he said. I didn't think twice. He led me to a table near the children's computers. I sat on one side, he sat on the other. We started flipping through the pages together, his long, bony finger moving across the glossy pictures. He asked me questions as we searched for objects. "What's your name?" "Dylan." "That's a nice name." "Thanks." "How old are you?" 5 or 6. "I don't know." 5 is a good age. He kept flipping pages, his eyes darting between me and the book. "Where do you go to school?" I told him. "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" I told him about my little brother, how he was a baby. how my mom took care of him a lot, how she was somewhere else in the library. That seemed to interest him. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "there's a special room in the basement just for kids. There are even more games down there. Do you want to see?" I had never been to the basement of the library before, but I knew it existed. I had seen the door in the back, with a small sign that said, "Meeting Rooms." "Come on," he said, standing up. "I'll show you." I hesitated, but then he smiled, and I followed. The basement stairs were made of old wood, and they creaked under our steps. It was dim down there, lit only by a few flickering yellow lights. I felt small, stepping onto the rough concrete floor. The walls were lined with empty bookshelves. At the end of the hall was a door. He pushed it open, revealing a small playroom. There were toys, a plastic slide, a Lego table, a little wooden rocking horse. It looked normal, but something about it felt wrong. "Come on," he said, stepping inside. I hesitated. Then I heard it. The intercom. A soft crackle. Then a woman's voice filled the air. "Will Dylan please come to the front desk? Your mother is looking for you." I looked at the man. His smile was gone. He took a step back toward the light switch. Another step. And then, in one quick motion, click, the room went black. "Let's play hide and seek," he whispered. I froze. My fingers went ice cold. I felt him move, a shadow shifting in the darkness. "Run." I turned and bolted for the door. Behind me, I heard shuffling, the sound of fabric moving, of feet sliding. I reached the hallway and ran, my breath coming in quick gasps. The wooden stairs loomed ahead, and I just knew, that if he caught me before I got upstairs, he'd pull me back into the darkness. One step, 2 steps. Thump. I heard his foot hit the floor. He was following me. I sprinted up the stairs, my ice cream cone hitting the floor, sticky, cold. I didn't care. I had to get out. I ran as fast as my little legs could go, up and up and up. I burst into the main floor, gasping for air. The librarian at the front desk turned, and standing next to her, my mom, her face filled with relief, then horror as she saw me, saw my tears, my red face. He, I gasped, pointing at the stairs. Everything happened so fast after that. A woman ran up to me, her voice soft but urgent. She asked me delicate questions, her eyes full of concern. Police officers showed up. They searched the library, but the man was gone. He must have slipped out another exit. I never saw him again. Mom held me so tightly I could barely breathe. I never asked my mom too many details about what happened that day. I don't think I wanted to know. All I know is that after that day, we stopped going to that library. And to this day, I can still see him. Half his face peeking around the bookshelf, smiling, saying peekaboo. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the intercom hadn't called my name. If my mom hadn't noticed I was missing. If I hadn't run. And sometimes, in the dark, just as I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear that whisper again. "Let's play hide and seek," coming from the shadows in the corner of my room.